Yeah, our demonstrator is Don Prorak. He holds the, he is been wood turning about 5 or 6 years. He is a musician. He's also going to play some music for us, so bear with him on that
Oh,
one. He's not, but I do know he's a musician, and he holds the same position in the Denver club that I do with this club. And he's up at Dave Lander's house in the shop. So that's where he's doing this demo from. And as you can see, he's going to spin a block sideways on that lathe. But I'll let Don go ahead and introduce himself a little better than I just did. And go ahead, Don.
okay, thank you. Yeah, my name is Don Prorak, and yeah, I'm the Vice President and Program Director for Front Range. And I'm also the youth mentor for Front Range. We have a program, I go out to school in Thornton called Stargate, and they have a shop program there, and we have an after-school turning club. So I work with high school students doing that. Yeah, I've only been turning 6 or 7 years. I'm not a professional turner, so the secret to success is lowered expectations. And this is only my third demo ever. Last June, I did my first one for Front Range on this, and and this was my third one. I've got one more booked, and I figure by that time my reputation will get around, and I'll never have to do another one. So this is what I'm doing here. This is the same as my first demo, which is a double tricorner vessel with a captive ring. And so to start out with, let's see, I guess a few years ago, I saw a video online. It was from Gwinnett Woodturners, our Woodworkers Club, and a guy named Frank Bowers, and he was doing just a tri-corner bowl, which I imagine a lot of people have done, where you basically turn away all of these corners and end up with just 3 corners left. And I got pretty fascinated with that. And actually, maybe we can start this little slideshow. And so I started making a bunch of different things with the tri-corner form. This was one that I made with as a lidded bowl, and I decided to make a tri-corner handle for the lid as well, which I thought that was fun. That was made from a block about I can't show it right now. I'll show you the blocks in just a minute. That was made from a block about 1 inch. And then, but as I kept doing more of these tri-corner things, I started thinking about the double tri-corner and why am I cutting away these other wings? And I hadn't seen anyone else do that. I found out that I assumed other people had done it. And so I started doing this. This was the very first one I ever made, and it was just a tea light holder. And let's see, maybe go to the next one. And then I decided to try doing a double tri-corner with a double tri-corner handle on the lid. And yeah, next one is the same piece, just a little bit different shot of it. And yeah, that handle was made from about 1.25 inch cube. And next one. Okay, yeah, and you can make, you know, you can make bowls out of these. I've made, let's see, well, tea light holders. In this case, we're going to make it's going to be a clock. And maybe, is that next up? No, okay, here's one with a little hollow form in the center. That was just kind of an experiment. And that was the first time I decided to try to do a captive ring on it. And that was actually a piece of ponderosa pine. But man, then I decided, okay, the captive ring is possible. And so then I made this clock, which I think is next. Yeah, this is made out of, what is it? Honey locust. Yeah. And next. And so, yeah, there's another view of the same clock. And that's kind of what we're going to be doing today, or what I'm going to be doing today. And then yeah, other things, I've also made this with as a napkin ring, and you know, with just a hole all the way through it. So a lot of different things you can do with this form. There's a lot of experimentation that you can do. Essentially, it starts from a cube, and I'm going to switch cameras here and Wait, oh, wrong one. There we go. Okay. It starts from a cube, and that cube is mounted point to point between the open end of the spindle and a tail center that has the point removed. I've seen other people do it differently, including flattening the ends and actually trying to center them. I find this is the easiest way to center it. I actually make a little pencil line here on my tool rest and try to line up these points and see if they all line up more or less. It doesn't have to be, absolute precision, but I like to get them as close as I can there. But it does have to be a cube. Well, I actually correct that. It doesn't have to be a cube, but you get some interesting results by going with something that's not quite a cube. You do get, your wings to be different lengths and all of that, which could make for some interesting forms. I haven't really experimented with that too much. I've made, probably the largest one I've ever made with this was 5 inches square cubed, but you could make them larger. Probably the smallest I've made them is about 1 inch cubed. And I had to make a special mounting for that because you couldn't do, that was just too much of the inside of the spindle. This is about the size that I use for the napkin rings. And then this size, 3, 4, 5 inches makes nice ones. You can do either solid wood. I tend to, as I say, I showed you that one I'd done was ponderosa pine. I don't really recommend soft woods for this. They're too chippy. It's got to be a dry wood project. And in this case, I'm using maple today, and this is glued up. You can use a solid block if you have some maple or whatever that thick. Now, this is an interesting glue up. I'm anxious to see how this is going to turn out. What I did with this one is I glued up 5 pieces of, this is a Yucatan hardwood that I got from CS Woods, and they weren't really sure what it was. But I got 2 different colors of it, and I glued up 5 pieces, and then I sliced them this way, and then rotated the 2 middle one, or the second and fourth one, 90 degrees. So I'm not sure how what that's going to look like yet, but looking forward to trying that one. The one caution, if you use glued up blocks, actually I noticed in this one there are a few gaps that I'm going to have to fill, and that can be a problem. Let me get rid of these. That can be a real problem with these if you have gaps. I think I got this one pretty tight. This is, as you can see, 4 pieces of maple glued together. And so let's get at it. Now, I don't know, well, I think there are a few people here who did see me do this for Front Range last year. And at that time, I was turning them a lot slower, and I was starting with a bowl gouge. Since then, I've gone to a 1/2 inch spindle gouge to do this, and this is just a, ordinary 1/2 inch spindle gouge, ground out with a Wolverine jig, nothing fancy. And when I start these, I always start from the cove in the middle. Now, if I'm not doing a captive ring, I would just, just hollow out the cove all the way. But in this case, I'm going to leave kind of a flat in the center to make my captive ring. So let's check it. And here we go. Now, one thing I'm a firm believer in is that better light makes you a better turner. However, we have found that with these Zoom demos, if the turner can see, the audience can't. So be going at it kind of blind. And so what I'm doing here is kind of feeling for my wing, finding the outside of that, levering into the cut, and going in. That was not good. Now, one thing I want to point out, you really can't afford to get too aggressive on these cuts because the way the grain is oriented. Oh, I forgot to talk about the grain orientation for those who haven't done this sort of thing before. Normally we talk about spindles having the grain parallel to the lathe bed, and our cross grain work is going perpendicular to the lathe bed. In this case, we're going at 45 degrees to the lathe bed. And so an aggressive cut may very well cause a chip that could chip all the way through and take out your, this is going to be a finished edge right here and right here, and you don't want to take any of that off. So I'm going to take a little bit more out of here before I start to form the ring. Let's see how that's looking. Still need a little more room in there.
Hey, Don, what RPM are you turning at?
I'm in the 2000 range.
Thanks.
I'm not worried too much about these curves yet because I'm going to be refining those as I go along. Now, one thing, when I first started turning the tricorners, I was under the impression that you didn't dare go beyond the actual corner of the block. You can go a little bit beyond it, and all that does is make the form slightly smaller from tip to tip, but you will continue to have the same basic shape. So I'm going to cut away just a little bit more here. And I'm feeling like my tool rest is a little bit low at this point. And the lathe is a little high for me, but. And one thing you will not see me do today, I realize it's a required element for a demonstrator. You're supposed to, at some point in the demo, move the tool rest with the lathe running while saying, never move the tool rest with the lathe running. With these wings, I'm not going to do that. So I will actually stop the lathe every time I move the tool rest. Okay. Now I'm going to want about a 3/8 of an inch ring in here. And so let's just mark that. Now I should actually have a longer, more robust parting tool for this, but I don't, so I'm going to use what I have. And we'll probably hear some vibrations. This is when I really wish I had some light. Ah, like that. I do remember years ago watching an all-day demo by Giulio Marcolongo from Australia, and every time something like that would happen, he'd just say, "Oh, those are just noises, just noises." No, do I have enough? I'm just checking my depth. I think that's probably going to be good. Go back to my spindle gouge now and take a little more off of these wings to give myself some clearance. Now, one of the things I know, like, as I say, I haven't really been turning that long, and I feel like clubs like Front Range and well, all the AAW clubs are such a wonderful thing because I've been able to learn from so many great demonstrators, some of whom are in your club. And I just reminded myself of one other thing I was supposed to say. When you're doing wing things like this, don't ever let your hand stray across the tool rest like I just did. Your hand stays on behind the tool rest at all times. And so as I was saying about all of these great turners I've been able to learn from, and I know one of the opportunities I got through Front Range was to take a 3-day workshop with Keith Gottschall down at his shop in Salida. And I remember Keith asked me when I started, he's like, what do you want to learn? And I said, at the time, I said, well, one of the things is it seems to take me so long to do every project. I'd like to learn to turn faster. And Keith's response was, well, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So I always try to keep that in mind whenever I start getting in a hurry. And I think I just went beyond my wing there. This is one of those times when a little more light would really be helpful, but I don't have it, so. Okay, that did not sound good. Yeah. I just took out my ring. So I'll tell you what. I do have a backup piece here, but that piece already has the wing cut away. So I wanted to show you how I texture that ring, and how I then cut it away. And I don't know how many of these things I've done this week without blowing one up. And of course, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen in demo. So,
it's all done.
Pardon?
It happens to us all.
Yep. So I think what I'm going to do is just proceed. I'm going to take that ring away and just, hollow this as if I was not doing it with a captive ring, and then show you the next couple of steps, and then I'm going to switch to the piece that already has the captive ring on it. So, because at this point, I think it's too late to start over on. I have another piece of wood, but I think that we should not go that route. Okay, so I'm going to just take that ring out of there. What happened basically
how you would
is
take it out, or how you
Pardon?
would finish it. Could you explain how you would finish the ring?
Well, what I would do with that ring, first of all, I would texture it. I'd put some teeth in it, and then I would take a captive ring tool and cut from both sides. I don't doubt that there are probably people watching this who would be able to get under that with a skew or some fine parting tool or something. I don't think I'm one of them. So I would take this captive ring tool, which is a cheapie. It's a Benji's Best. It's almost steel, like most of their tools. And but if I hone it, every time I use this thing, I hone it first, and I'm able to go around this and make my ring. If I tried to do that now, that's not going to work out too well. So I'm just going to cut that ring away and go ahead and make this just a double tricorner without a captive ring.
Hey, Don, can you show us that texturing tool again? And when you do that, do you do that, hold it at center or straight on, or how does that work?
Okay, I usually set it up so it's hitting pretty much at center. So I'd lower the tool rest. You bring it back so it's resting on this, somewhat back on this bar. Although some people take this off, depending on what I'm doing, I might take it off. But for this, and then I would see if maybe I can actually texture this with part of it missing. Yeah. Yeah, so here's the tool. It's the Sorby texturing tool. I have the small Sorby tool as well, and I use them both. I kind of like these things. I'm not a carver, so this is one way of bringing some interest into my work without having to get into that area. So let me just see if maybe I can put a little texture on this even with the piece missing. And for the texturing, I'm going to want to turn my speed way down, around 500-600 RPM. And I'll start it out right in the center like this. And then as I get the cut established, I'll move it down just slightly so it's coming in underneath. And just kind of go back and forth across. And I have that tool pretty firmly locked into my side because it will want to skate away from you.
So Don, does it make a track or a pattern and then stay in that pattern as you
Yes, it does.
make it cleaner?
Yeah, and as the deeper you get, the more you get farther into the teeth, and you get a nice rounded top to it. Let me just do just a tiny bit more of that.
Don, it appears you're holding the wheel on the cutter at about a 30-degree angle to the ring.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have this actually set at that angle. Now I've watched Nick Agar will do these things where he'll like vary the angle of as he's going across the surface of something. You can get some really cool effects that way too. But I've got it set at an angle, and that way I get fairly even teeth on this. And then when I'm finished with that, I actually, the end of these Sorby tools always has this brass thing, which I think they just use it to cover up the mounting on the end of it. So I'll take that and burnish my texture, and it tends to just kind of smooth it out a little bit. Can't really tell at this point because I didn't texture it all the way, but if I went into that deeper, I'll show you when I switch to the other piece. So I'm going to take that ring away now. Any other questions about the texturing tool? And here we got some really deep texture. So any other questions about the texturing tool?
Hey Don, does it actually take out wood, or does it just indent it or whatever?
No, it cuts. It cuts out wood.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, one thing, okay, here's one I made yesterday as a backup for this. And so there's the texturing on that. And so once I would make that ring, what I would do is tape the ring over to one side, and then I can smooth out the underneath of that ring, then tape it over on the other side and go back and forth. Well, usually I can do it, on a good day I can do it in just 2 cuts. Sometimes it takes 3, but basically that's the technique of that. But if you decide you don't like that ring in there, you can always take it away very easily. So I'm not going to take up a lot of time with refining this whole area, since we're not going to really finish this piece. So what I'm going to work on now is forming these wings here and making a tenon down here, because this will be the foot of the piece. Oh, wait, I'm tripping over something here. Ah, an air hose. Another tip, never leave your water bottle right underneath the lathe. Yum, maple.
Just adds fiber to your diet.
So, first thing I'm going to do, and this was actually something that I remember I was up here for a demo that Jimmy Clues did, and or no, this was actually he did when he was doing it for Front Range. He was making a regular tri-corner, and I don't always do this, but he recommended establishing the thickness of your wing with a parting tool and just making a little nick in there to get to, so that you see where you're headed for. So let's do that first of all. Let's see how that looks. And I think I'm going to want to go just a hair thinner on that. That looks pretty good. And then I'm taking away waste here, but again, I don't want to get too aggressive because I don't want to take a chip that's going to go all the way across. Particularly if you're using solid wood, it seems like there'll be one side of this that'll be particularly vulnerable to like a chip that'll go all the way out to the edge, and that'll ruin your rim. Now I do finish these on on a belt sand or a disc sander anyway. So if you have a slight chip, you can take it out, but if you have a big chip, it's gone. Take a little waste from this side. I don't want to take away too much. For one thing, I want to have some mass left for support while I go out to these wings. And also I've got to be conscious of how much wood I need for my tenon. I have to say I did some practicing using less light than I like to, but I didn't practice in this low a light. Of course, there is a turner I've seen some of his work, but I've never seen him actually work, named Michael Blankenship, who is blind. So let's see how we're getting down there. Okay, getting close. And now at this point, I also have to decide what kind of profile I want to go for. I had oh, here we are. Here's a whiteboard. So with these wings, I can go for an even wall thickness, which I think is going to generally impress the woodturners. Lift this up just a little bit. I can go for a little bit of a smile profile, where I get a little bit thicker down in the middle, or I can do the opposite. I didn't draw. I'm not very good at drawing, but let's see. So I can make it a little bit thicker at the wings and a little bit thinner in the middle. And I don't know, all of them to me have some appeal, but I think in general, I kind of like this little bit of a smile, just a little bit thicker towards the center. And then sometimes it's a matter of, well, how did it come out? We'll see. And I do stop and check these quite a bit when I get down to this point. Okay, let's see how that's looking. Still a little thick for my taste. Didn't realize that was prone to come loose. Okay, and you can see I did take a chip out here. That is a little bit deep, but I might be able to get away with that on the disc sander. And so I'm going to go ahead and make a tenon on this, and I'm using 50mm jaws. Pick up my old beater of a caliper. And I'm going to want to put this tenon fairly close to the bottom so I don't have too much wood to remove when I turn it around and remove the tenon. Let's just check the size on that. Yeah, it's getting close. Now, this was another thing from Jimmy Clues. He said to go out and buy the cheapest parting tool you can get. Again, Benji's best, almost steel. And use it, grind it at a dovetail angle, and then use it only for making tenons and recesses. And that's the only thing you ever use this tool for. Now, one of the things I really appreciated when Dave Landers did a session for our club down in Denver, he talked a lot about how the important part of the tenon was this shoulder right here, that it registers against your chuck jaw. So that needs to be flat, or it can even be a little bit concave, but you don't want it convex. Now I'm using Nova jaws, and Nova tells you that you should make a straight tenon and not a dovetail tenon, but I've always made dovetail tenons with it, and it seems to have worked better for me. So I make a slight dovetail tenon and put it in the Nova jaws. Just gonna refine that just a little bit. And then what I need to do at this point, well, I need to take a little bit more out of here. I'll finish that cut. And then I need to just basically whittle away at this piece. But of course, I can't take the whole thing out of there because this is just a friction drive. There's nothing supporting that if that goes away. So what I want to do, oh man, sorry about that. Didn't feel like I touched it that hard, but I guess I did. And I really need to be kind of careful with this because if this were to break off, the piece would be destroyed. So I'm going to cut it down to this level. And then what I would do normally is I take this little bitty saw and take that piece off and try to remember not to throw it on the floor so that I don't step on it because those aren't real comfortable. But in this case, I'm going to take this piece out of here and I'm going to replace it with the piece that's already done up to that point. And yeah, questions?
Yeah, Don,
some-
when you were mounting your first piece on those points on your headstock and tailstock, did you do anything in particular to the points to get them to seat in there?
No, I just stuck one end into the spindle, and the other end into this. I have a tail center. This is a Nova tail center that I have the point removed, but no preparation on it. Now, one thing I have seen, there's a company called Rubber Chucky, and Rudy Lopez talks about them a lot. They make a lot of great products, and they actually make some centers that are designed to hold cubes like that. I don't know if I see a point in that because well, it seems perfectly easy to just stick it in there, and also with a friction drive, if you do get a catch, you're probably just going to stop the piece rather than destroying it. So to me, it seems logical to just stick with that friction drive.
Hey, Don, this is Jenny. I have a question for you. Dave Landers in his presentation last month emphasized that if you turn the same thing over and over again, in a way you're removing one of the variables and you allow your technique to improve. And I'm just kind of curious, how many of these winged forms do you think you've turned to refine your technique to this point? And did you create any or lots or a few pieces of firewood along the way?
Oh, lots of firewood. Yeah, actually, in practicing for the demo, I did a lot of them particularly after the first demo. I did a lot of them that I never even really intended to finish. You know, so I would do no sanding on them at all. And
Welcome to Getting to Know Informatics.
but
Today we'll have a brief overview of the account list, the register, and the toolbars.
so I don't know how many of them I've turned. I know that I have burned a bunch of them. I know my wife was getting really annoyed with double tricorner things at times when I know right now on my workbench there's probably at least half a dozen of them sitting there that have been either recently finished or actually I did one this morning. So so yeah, I've done quite a few of them, and I have you know, that I think that's a good comment that production turning does make you a better turner. I've never been a production turner, but you know, you think of people like Richard Raffin, you know, who just, you know, spent years doing nothing but you know, turning multiples of pieces, commercial pieces, and you know, the guy has just absolutely amazing technique. I don't know how many people have actually had a chance to watch Richard Raffin work. I did a couple of years ago when he was in Denver.
Banking section with your check. Checking credit card transactions. Your investing section.
I think he at one point he was hollowing a medium-sized bowl, and I think it took him 5 cuts. You know, just removing incredible amounts of wood, and it's like, okay, the bowl's hollowed. You know, so yeah, I would definitely endorse that idea that making multiples of something really does make you a better turner. And like I said, I've done quite a few captive rings this week without blowing them up, but not so today. So this is a piece that I had prepared in advance just because I didn't want to show going back and forth with all this tape, and how, you know, cleaning out this center. And that's another point when it is kind of dangerous, because when you're going into here with a gouge, now you can also get in there with a small scraper, but when you're going in there with a gouge, it is easy to catch on that ring, and even with the tape, it would blow up. I've heard. Okay. So let's tighten this down. See that that's seated properly. And I'm going to keep my tailstock up for support. Now, as I said, there's many different things you can make with this basic form. What I'm going for today, if it hasn't been buried in the shavings, is to mount a little clock face in there. And so what we're going to go for is a 1 3/8 inch hole. The clock face is about 1.5 inches total. So basically everything up here is waste. But again, I want to make sure I don't, you know, get a chip along this grain that takes out a piece of that. And this one I would like to finish, so. Okay, get my bearings here. And I don't think I'm going to do that cut with the parting tool this time, mainly because in this light I can't really see it anyway, so it doesn't, it's not really that helpful. So I'm just going to continue nibbling away at these wings and taking down this center. Now, another guy that I saw at the symposium a few years ago, and I'd really like to learn more from him, and Eric Lofstrom. And one of the things that Eric talks about is, he says that every cut starts from your feet. And this is actually one of the things I don't like about the online demos, is that frequently when I'm watching someone demonstrate, I try to watch more of their body movement and the placement of their feet, but the cameras are always focused on the tip of the tool. And I will say that I am far from perfect in that regard. I frequently find myself going, "Oh wait, move your feet, get better balanced." So let me just switch cameras for a second here, and maybe I'll try to do things right. Gouge is seeming just a little bit dull. Speaking of the symposium, I certainly hope it's going to be able to happen this year. You know, obviously the AAW had to cancel theirs in June. see. Just noises. And somebody asked about speed earlier, and yeah, one of the things about when you're working on any kind of winged vessel is that when you're cutting air and wood, the faster you're turning, the more it does behave like a solid piece of wood. And you're always going to have, you know, that vibration in there, but and the infamous one more cut. Let's see how that looks. Oh, that's too thick. I'm gonna match it to this one. So that's gonna take two more cuts to get that down, I think. Maybe one more cut if I could see, but any other questions or comments? So this is actually kind of the point when I have to decide, well, what is it I want to make with this? If I were making a bowl, almost all of this would go away. Well, almost all of it's going to go away anyway, but decide, well, do I want to have a rim on that bowl? In this case, as I said, we're going to make the clock face. So I'm going to probably leave about that much in the middle, down to about here. Kind of make a curved bezel with that and drill a hole for the clock. How am I doing on time? I think we're in pretty good shape. My tape is starting to come off of there. Back out, find that wing. It still needs one more. I'm being cautious here because I really don't want to blow this one up. Did that do it?
Question
Oh,
for you.
pardon? Yeah.
So, do you ever use a scraper as far as finishing on a three-cornered piece like that?
It seems to me that well, when I have, it leaves a lot of tool marks, which means a lot of sanding. And
Okay.
unlike most people, I actually don't like to sand.
I certainly understand that. So,
So I'm going to try. Now I actually cut in a little bit too far on the inside. So this is a little bit dangerous here. I'm going to try to even out those wings. And yeah, I see your point about a scraper right there, but generally I haven't had good results with a scraper on wing things like this.
Don,
Yeah.
Alan Joycey.
Oh, Alan, you joined us. Alan
Yes,
is
I
in
did.
England.
Yes, I did.
and it's about what 2 o'clock in the morning there.
Yeah, about 1:45.
Yeah.
Let me see the grind on your skew. Can you?
On my skew.
Yeah, sorry, on your spindle gouge.
It's
Right.
just you know, from a Wolverine jig. Pretty standard
Swept
grind,
back,
I
yeah.
think.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let's see if that did it. I'm going to accept that for a demo piece for right now. If I was at home, I probably wouldn't. But I'm going to call that is what it is. And I'm going to go on to now this part I can remove because I am held firmly in a chuck here. So here goes. I think we're going to lose some tape here. I think I just went into Jimmy Clues mode there, which is, what's the correct turning speed? Well, how fast does this thing go? this point, I'm going to break that off rather than have it go flying into the wings. Get this out of the way here. And now I am done with my tailstock, at least until I turn this thing around. Yeah, Alan Joyce, flattered that he would stay up to watch me. But when I did my first demo for Front Range, he saw it saw something about it online and contacted me through Facebook, and was like, and then I saw some of his work, and it's like, he does beautiful stuff. But he does similar things with the double tricorners and some beautiful lidded boxes with this. And so Alan, I am flattered. So things are really getting buried in the shavings here. So let's find where our 1.5 inch mark is going to be. And it is really important for new turners, if you're going to use calipers in this way, you only touch the left point. That right point never touches because it can go flying up towards you. Become embedded in your anatomy. Okay, so now what I want to do is form a bezel here. Let's see if I can get this a little farther out of my way and take this. Okay, credit with an assist. Oh, it doesn't have to be off. Just, yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Okay, so now let's go. Actually, yeah, I don't need it. I need to take this out of here. What we're going to do is drill a hole for our clock face, and this particular kind of clock face, and a lot of them require a 1 3/8 inch hole. So the drill bit mounted in a Jacob's chuck. Just have a scale on it. Ah, there we go. Yeah. Okay, so what I like to do is set it so I've got 1 inch on the scale, and then I'm going to want to go in about 3/8. The clock itself is only about 1/4 inch deep, but I like to leave some room in the bottom so that if it's for a gift or if you sell these things, you've got room to put an extra battery inside. Okay, and I also want to slow the lathe way down for drilling. Remove some chips. And that's good. And let's take this back here and get the elbow reshaper out. And now I realize that nobody is going to look and really see inside of this thing because it is going to be covered by a clock face, but I still don't like that hole that the Forstner bit leaves. So I am going to take a box scraper, and this is another cheapie, another Benji's Best. And what am I looking? Oh, we probably need to be looking at it from more of this angle. And so I'm going to just take a little bit out of that bottom to get rid of that divot from the drill bit. And this is a box scraper. Oops, tool rest is way down too low for this. Box scraper. I grind it a little bit convex, so there's a little bit of an arc on the end. Should have about a 90-degree angle right here, but again, I grind it back just a little bit so that you're not scraping with that whole surface at one time. And being a traditional scraper, not a negative rake, you need to have a slight downward angle to the scraper. I don't really want to touch the sides of this because they are exactly the right size for my clock face. You know, at this point, it's relatively safe. I'm going to take off my face shield because I just can't see. I do like to turn with a full face shield, but I also like to be able to see what I'm doing. Yep, that just about does it. And I'm going to flatten this edge a little bit to make a nice setting for my clock. Let's see how that looks. Okay. And I was going to mention something about sanding. I'm not going to sand in the demo because it's kind of bad form. And also waste, nobody wants to watch you sand. But I do find I can sand into here with these foam-backed, here we are, foam-backed pieces of sandpaper. These are made by Festool, and they sell them at Woodcraft for 50 cents a sheet, which makes it the only Festool thing that I can afford. I don't really recommend sanding on these wings that way with the lathe running because it tends to make, leave streaks on there. And so that usually ends up being a fair amount of hand sanding to get that right. But I just ordered something from Woodturners Wonders. They call it the sanding taco. And I haven't tried it yet, but it's basically shaped like a taco shell, and it's a piece of foam with Velcro on it. And you can put a sheet of sandpaper onto that and get into areas like that. So I'm anxious to see how that turns out. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a decorative groove right about there. And I'm going to get my calipers here. Yes, I have. Yes. Okay, yeah, that right about there will work. Okay, and you're probably asking yourself, why is he measuring that? It's just a decorative groove. And this, by the way, is a point tool. This is just a crown point tool. Yeah, that's pretty good. What do we think? So, for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to consider the top of that to be done. I'm not entirely happy with it. I would want to take a little bit more off of these wings, which is a little risky. And I would like to do that at home when I have actual light and I'm not worried about not doing something completely blind. So I'm not really happy with that. I'm not really happy with this cut in here. Overall, I think the bezel shape is good. My clock, I think, will look pretty nice in there. Now, can I get it out? Because I need to get it out. You have fingernails?
I don't have fingers.
A knife might, yeah, I might need a knife. Yeah, that should do it. Okay, now depending on what you're making here, turning this around to take off the bottom can be an issue. And you could make a jam chuck to fit right on that 1 3/8. I like to get it, a jam chuck that's tight enough that I would be able to actually have access to the full bottom. I would use my tailstock as long as possible, then I'd like to be able to remove it. When you're making bowls, if you make a bowl shape, what I like to do is leave the top 1/4 inch of my bowl absolutely straight so that I can make a jam chuck and really get it on there tight and be able to access the bottom. One thing that's really tricky with these, when you make a bowl, is oh, yeah. Okay. One thing that if you're making a bowl with these things, one of the things that is kind of difficult is to actually gauge where the bottom of your bowl is, other than by memory, because once it's there on the jam chuck, you can't see the inside of that. And because of the curves here, it's difficult to measure exactly where where the bottom of the bowl is. So, you can sometimes end up making funnels. Actually, I've never made a funnel with these. Usually the problem is I end up at the bottom, and I think the bottom is too thick after that. In this case, because of this recess being way up here, there's absolutely no way that I'm going through the bottom of this. And I made this decorative ring, and this was something I discovered when I was making the napkin rings. I was kind of doing a production job on those. And if I make this just about the right size for my chuck jaws, where they're round, which is just about at that 2-inch or 50 millimeter mark, I can grip on that little decorative ring. Oops, except I missed it. And the jaws won't mar the wood. I don't want to grip it too tight, but I want to have it firmly in the chuck. And then I would bring up my tail center and pop in this tail center which you can get that tail center from Cindy Drozda, as I did. I would bring up my tail center, and then, as just in typical fashion, I would cut away my tenon. I would like to be able to finish this piece at home, so I'm not going to cut my tenon away. And I think we all know how to do that. So I'd just be taking cuts, and in this case, I would just make this a nice smooth curve all the way to the center, maybe make some decorative rings on the bottom, sign it, and call it done. So with that, I'm going to take this back off the lathe, and I'm going to call it a demo. Any questions or comments, cat calls?
Looks really nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So here, let me switch cameras here. Oops. Guess I didn't. Here we go. Okay, so as I said, I'm not really happy with some of this at the top, but I think I can take it home and when I have some light and finish it. I have sometimes also, when I make these, I've sometimes made a second decorative groove, depending how much room I have here, and maybe textured in between the two grooves, and it makes it even look even more intentional and less like a holding device. I've also done these, you know, just made a jam chuck to fit into there. So lots of different ways to handle that. Any other questions? Or
Where do you get your clock?
That particular one did come from Penn State. Lately, I've been buying them from Clockit. They have better prices, pretty much the same stuff, although they have more of a selection. KLOCKIT.com, Clockit, is
Okay.
a good source.
Thank you.
Don, is the light issue associated with Zoom, or is it associated with the camera?
I think it's the cameras. Yeah, I think it's the cameras that they don't tend to like that much contrast, and so yeah, I mean, whether you're doing this is a webcam, which apparently webcams are more valuable than toilet paper these days. Yeah, I'm not sure how you're supposed to wipe your butt with a with a webcam, but if you don't have toilet paper, yeah. But yeah, so when I was experimenting with it, I was using phones and iPads, and same issue. The cameras didn't seem to really like the intense light.
So Don, a question for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you put, in some cases, 2 decorative rings along that edge and then do some embellishment or texturing on it. How careful do you have to be with that Sorbet tool getting in there?
Pretty careful. Pretty careful because, well, in this case, I would like, this is a texturing wheel, and this is just going to give you kind of an orange peel finish. And right. So if I go in here, now at this point, I don't think I would do that on this one because I don't really I'd be awfully close to that wing. But if I had a little bit more room there, I would say if I made this bezel a little bit higher, I could go in here and very carefully, you know, make a textured surface in between 2 rings. But yeah, you do have to be careful with it. It will tend to want to, you know, grab on you and go to the side. Yep.
That was my next question.
Yeah. So yeah, I usually, you know, start it out. Ultimately, you have to put a fair amount of pressure on these things, but I tend to start it out pretty light and then gradually build up the pressure until I'm getting the texture that I want.
Hey Don, how's the clock held in there? Just by friction, so that
it's
recess has to be really, really close.
Yeah, well, if you drill an 1/8 and 3-inch hole, it's going to fit.
Right.
It's made to fit that. Although it does have a little bit of, if you look at the mounting, there's kind of a spring on there.
Mhm.
And so it does put a little bit of spring pressure on there. But yeah, once you drill your hole, you really don't want to mess with those sides because, if you make it too big, the clock's going to just fall out. And that's one thing with the clock. I like to make them so that they sit up like this. I'm sorry. Yeah, sit up like that. And sometimes I've actually, adjusted the balance by sanding this edge on a disc sander to get the angle that I want. The one problem with these things, let me come back to this. The one problem with that is that if you leave it, for example, at the symposium in the exhibit hall, someone will pick it up to look at it, they'll look at it, and they'll set it back down on the table like this. And so I haven't figured out a way to, even though I work on the balance and get it to sit and actually with the clock, the weight of the clock in there, it balances pretty nicely. But people will always pick it up, set it down there, and kind of destroys, for me, it destroys the look of the piece. I forgot to mention when I had, this was a tea light holder that I made the other day just when I was practicing. And this one never had a ring on it. I didn't blow that one up. It just never had a ring. But that's where I did the texturing in between two rings like that, in between two decorative grooves.
Do you ever use color on anything, Don, or just texturing?
I have not. My wife keeps saying I need to use more color, and I haven't gotten into that too much. I would like to, and I probably should start. Maybe that's the next step. So, yeah, I think a lot of things would look good with some color.
Don, it's Alan.
Pardon?
Alan, Don.
Oh yes, yeah, Alan.
Just thanks for the invite. And for the experience. I'll be in touch.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you so much, Alan, for tuning in.
Thank you, and good night.
Good night.
Good night, Alan.
What's left of it for you?
Yeah.
Anyone else? Any other comments?
Are there any other questions out there?
Well, then I'll end with a little quote. Actually, two quotes. One that I like to remember always: creativity is allowing yourself to make mistakes, and art is deciding which ones to keep. And then the other one that I think we all can relate to: art is long, life is short. Get busy.
Thank you. So in keeping with as much as closest to our regular meetings as possible, thank you very much for the demonstration. That was really good. I enjoyed it much. The other thing is for anybody whose last name starts between I and P, be sure to put the chairs away, okay? There we go. There we go.
Oh, and when is the cleanup crew showing up?
Yeah. That's Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Don.
Okay. And thank you for allowing me to demonstrate.
Yeah, David, thank you again for letting them use your shop. Appreciate that a lot. Thank you, Dave
Thanks
Landers.
to Camille and Tom for
everybody
engaging me for this, and to all of you for putting up with me, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.